That night, I couldn't get Mary's words out of my head. "You'll regret it." The way she'd said it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And promises from Mary always came with teeth. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the glow of the streetlights outside my window. My anger burned hot, but underneath it was something colder: resolve. I was done waiting for their next move. Done being reactive. If they wanted to test me, I'd show them I wasn't going to break. The first thing I did the next morning was drive to the bank. I pulled the second set of copies from the deposit box and had the manager certify them with an official notarization. Then I went 2 steps further. I sent digital scans to Daniel's office, encrypted files he could pull up in court if needed. They could steal from my apartment. They couldn't erase me everywhere. But I didn't stop there. I started documenting everything. The letter my mother had sent, the break-in, even the conversation with Mary on the porch. Every detail went into a journal, along with dates and times. I wasn't just preparing for court anymore. I was building a record, piece by piece, in case things turned darker, because I had a gnawing feeling they would. A week later, things did. I was driving home from work when I noticed the same car behind me at 3 different turns, a dark sedan with tinted windows. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. But then it followed me onto the side street near my apartment. My pulse spiked. I sped up, turned sharply, circled the block. The car stayed with me. Finally, I pulled into a crowded gas station, heart hammering. The sedan slowed, hesitated, then peeled away. I sat there in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. Coincidence? No. Not after everything else. They were watching me now. When I told Daniel, his face darkened. This is intimidation. Classic tactic. They're trying to rattle you, make you feel unsafe so you'll fold. It's working, I admitted. I feel like I can't breathe half the time. He leaned forward, his voice steady. Then you need to flip the script. Instead of letting them scare you, we put them on defense. File a petition with the court to enforce your trustee rights. That forces their hand. They'll have to respond officially, and it'll be harder for them to play these games in the shadows. I swallowed hard. And if they retaliate? They will, he said simply. But then it becomes evidence. And judges don't look kindly on intimidation. I stared at him, absorbing his words. Flip the script. For the first time, the idea of not just surviving this, but actually pushing back, flickered like a spark in my chest. Let's do it, I said. 2 days later, the petition was filed. And within 24 hours, my phone rang. It was Mary. "Brave little Esther," she said when I answered, her voice low and mocking. "Marching into court like you belong there. Mother says you've grown a backbone." I say it won't last. I gripped the phone tighter. "If you're calling to scare me, you're wasting your time." "Oh, I'm not trying to scare you," she said sweetly. "I'm just letting you know what's coming. Court moves slow. We don't. You should probably start checking over your shoulder more often." And then she hung up. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about the estate anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about control. Mother and Mary had built their lives on the belief that they could bend everyone else to their will. And now, for the first time, someone, me, was standing in their way. I thought of Father again, of his voice in my memory. "Land doesn't lie, Esther. People do. But land remembers who tends it." And I knew what he meant. He hadn't left this to me because I was the strongest or the loudest. He'd left it because he believed I'd protect it. That was my line in the sand. They could watch me, threaten me, even try to break me. But I wasn't backing down. Because this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was his legacy. The courthouse smelled of old wood and paper, a mix of history and judgment that clung to the walls. As I walked through the double doors with Daniel at my side, I couldn't shake the feeling that the entire building was leaning in, waiting to see if I'd stumble. This was the first hearing on the petition Daniel filed, my first real step into open war. Mary and Mother were already inside, seated at the other table with their attorney. Mother looked as composed as ever, her pearl necklace perfectly centered, her expression unreadable. Mary, on the other hand, couldn't hide her smirk. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, like this was entertainment. I forced myself not to look away. The judge entered, and the room rose. My pulse thudded in my ears as the proceedings began. Their lawyer went first, rattling off reasons why my petition was unfounded and based on outdated, unfiled documents. He painted me as unstable, bitter, desperate. When he said the word unstable, Mary glanced back at me with a smile that made my skin crawl. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood, calm and steady, and placed a stack of papers before the judge. Your Honor, here are the court-certified originals of Mr. Whitaker's will and trust, filed properly with probate. These documents explicitly name Esther Whitaker as co-trustee and equal beneficiary. Not only are they valid, but they also contain clauses to protect her from precisely the kind of exclusion that is being attempted here. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, his brow furrowing. The silence stretched. Finally, he looked up. On first review, the documents appear valid. I will allow time for both parties to submit further arguments, but for now, Ms. Whitaker's petition stands. She retains co-trustee authority until a final ruling is made. My knees nearly buckled. It wasn't a full victory, but it was recognition. For the first time, the court acknowledged that I belonged. Mother's lips tightened. Mary's smirk vanished. And in that moment, I knew I'd landed a blow. But victories in court don't end battles outside of it. That evening, as I left the courthouse, I felt eyes on me again. A figure leaned against a car across the street, watching. When I glanced his way, he slipped into the driver's seat and pulled off. The same dark sedan. I hurried to my car, heart racing. This wasn't random anymore. It was deliberate. They wanted me to know I was being followed. That night, Daniel called. You did well today, he said. I almost threw up, I admitted. That's normal. First fights always shake you. But listen carefully, Esther. They're going to push harder now. The more ground you gain, the more vicious they'll get. He paused, then added, I need you to consider security. A camera at your apartment. Changing routines. Even, he hesitated. Even staying somewhere else for a while. I bit my lip. You really think they'd go that far? I think they already have, he said grimly. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak in the apartment, every hum from the refrigerator felt like footsteps in the dark. I kept the lights on, my father's folder, the notarized copy, clutched in my hands like a shield. By morning, exhaustion had me half delirious. But I forced myself to focus. Because if fear was their weapon, I couldn't let it pierce me. So I made a decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to take control. 2 days later, I drove back to the estate, this time not to confront but to claim. I pulled up to the gates, heart pounding, and pressed the intercom. This is Esther Whitaker, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. As co-trustee, I'm exercising my legal right to inspect the property. There was a long silence. Then the gates clicked open. I drove through, my hands gripping the wheel. This wasn't trespass. This wasn't begging for acceptance. This was mine. As I stepped out of the car and onto the gravel drive, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since Father's death, I wasn't just reacting to their threats. I was planting my flag. And I knew, as I stood before the house that had been turned into their fortress, that the war had truly begun. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked toward the house, each step echoing louder in my chest than it should have. The place hadn't changed. The white columns still gleamed, the shutters freshly painted, the wide porch wrapping around like open arms. But it felt different. It felt like it was watching me. I paused at the bottom of the steps, staring up at the door I'd walked through 1,000 times as a child. I half expected Father to appear on the porch, his voice booming, telling me to get inside and wash up before dinner. The memory was so sharp it almost made me stumble. But Father wasn't here. Mother was. The door swung open before I could knock. She stood there, perfectly poised as if she'd been expecting me. Mary hovered just behind her, arms crossed, her smile sharp as glass. Well, Mother said smoothly, the prodigal daughter returns. And this time with paperwork. I forced myself to meet her gaze. I'm not here for theatrics. I'm here to fulfill my role as co-trustee. which means I have a right to inspect the property. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered, the tiniest crack. Of course, she said after a beat. The law is the law. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Come in then. See the house you've neglected all these years. I bit back a retort and walked past her. Mary whispered something as I passed, but I kept my chin high and didn't turn. Inside, everything was immaculate. The rugs gleamed, the silver in the display cabinet sparkled, even the air smelled faintly of polish and lavender. But there was something suffocating about it. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a stage. Mother led me through the rooms, her commentary sharp and pointed. This wing, of course, has been renovated since your father passed. Mary oversaw the details. She's been very involved in managing the estate. Mary smirked. Somebody had to step up. I ignored the jab, taking notes as Daniel had instructed. Every expense, every renovation, every claim they made about management. It wasn't just observation. It was evidence. When we reached Father's study, I stopped short. The rooms smelled the same, leather and old paper, dust and wood. His chair was still behind the desk, though it looked too polished, too untouched. Mother lingered in the doorway, her tone deceptively casual. You always did like this room, didn't you, Esther? Strange, given how little you actually contributed to it. My jaw tightened. Strange, given how much time Father spent with me here, teaching me things you never cared to learn. For the first time, she stiffened. Mary opened her mouth to retort, but Mother silenced her with a glance. We stood there in silence, the weight of years pressing down on all of us. Finally, I said, "This house remembers, even if you'd rather it didn't." Then I turned and walked out, leaving them to stew in the words. By the time I got back to my car, my hands were trembling. Not from fear, not entirely at least. From adrenaline. From the realization that I had just faced them, on their ground, and hadn't folded. But as I pulled out of the drive, a new thought took root. This wasn't just about me standing tall. It was about uncovering what they were hiding. Because the house might be polished, but I knew my mother too well. Underneath the shine, there were cracks. Secrets. And if I wanted to win, I had to find them. That night, I spread my notes across my kitchen table. Daniel called, his voice brisk but tinged with approval. You did well, he said after I described the visit. Document everything, especially the renovations. If they used estate funds improperly, it could strengthen your case. I nodded, scribbling down his words. They're hiding something, Daniel. I can feel it. He was quiet for a moment. Then we'll find it. Just be careful. When people feel cornered, they lash out. I thought of Mary's smirk, of the way Mother's eyes had flashed when I mentioned Father's study. They were already lashing out. And this was only the beginning. That night, as I tried to sleep, a memory of Father came to me. Him sitting in that very study, his hand resting on a stack of papers, his voice low and steady. Esther, he'd said, one day people will try to twist what's yours. But remember this, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. I held on to that memory like a lifeline, because now, more than ever, I needed the truth to stand. For days after my visit to the estate, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. The gleam of the floors, the perfect silver, Mother's calm veneer. It was all too rehearsed, too controlled. I'd grown up in that house. I knew its rhythm, its pulse. And what I saw wasn't a home being cared for. It was a stage set, carefully arranged to project order, which meant there was disorder hiding somewhere. And I intended to find it. Daniel encouraged me to dig carefully, methodically. Don't let them bait you into emotional outbursts, he reminded me. Your power is in facts, not fury. So I started with paper. I pulled every public record I could on the estate, property tax filings, renovation permits, expense reports from the businesses tied to it. Late nights blurred into mornings as I scrolled through scanned documents, highlighting figures that didn't make sense. And then I saw it. A transfer. 6 weeks after Father's funeral, a large sum had been pulled from one of the estate accounts. Not a small household expense or a repair. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, funneled into a shell company with a name I didn't recognize. I sat back, heart pounding. This wasn't just questionable. It was suspicious. I called Daniel immediately. "That could be misappropriation," he said, his voice sharper than usual. "If they used estate funds without trustee approval, that's serious. It could tip the balance heavily in your favor." "Then why hasn't the court seen this?" I asked. "Because no one's presented it yet. But now that you've found it," he paused, "we'll need more proof. Bank statements, company records. If this shell company connects back to your mother or Mary, it's dynamite." Dynamite. The word sent a thrill through me. For the first time, I felt like I had a weapon of my own. The next step was risky, but I couldn't stop myself. I went back to the estate. This time, I didn't walk through the front door. I waited until dusk, parked down the road, and walked the long stretch on foot. My pulse hammered with every step, but I pushed forward, drawn by something stronger than fear. The side of the house near the study had always been a weak point, a ground-level window that Father used to leave cracked for air. As kids, Mary and I had snuck in through it a dozen times when we were supposed to be asleep. That night, I found it still open just enough. My hands trembled as I slid it higher and climbed inside. The study was dark, but the scent hit me instantly. Leather, dust, and something faintly metallic. The room hadn't changed much since Father's days, though the desk looked too clean, too polished. I opened drawers carefully, searching. Most were empty, as if Mother had stripped them bare. But in the bottom drawer, under a false panel I remembered from years ago, I found a folder. Not Father's handwriting this time. Mother's. I flipped it open with shaking hands. Inside were invoices, contracts, all tied to that shell company. And at the bottom, one sheet that made my blood run cold. It was a transfer authorization. Signed not just by Mother. By Mary. I stuffed the papers into my bag, my heart racing. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was conspiracy. They'd both been in on siphoning money, and they'd left a trail. As I climbed back out the window, adrenaline surging, I felt the house behind me like a living thing. The house remembered. And now so did I. When I got home, I spread the documents on my table, barely able to breathe. This was the first real crack in their armor. For weeks, they had tried to make me doubt myself, to make me feel powerless. But now I had something they couldn't laugh away. Something the court couldn't ignore. I picked up the transfer authorization and stared at Mary's signature. The neat loops, the sharp finish. The same hand that had once written me notes in school. The same hand that had held mine during storms when we were little. Now it was proof of her betrayal. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a battle against greed. This was the slow, deliberate unraveling of family itself. By the time morning broke, I was still at the kitchen table, papers spread out like a battlefield map. I hadn't slept a wink. Every time I tried, my eyes snapped open and went back to Mary's signature. I kept asking myself the same question. How could she? I understood Mother's coldness, her hunger for control. But Mary, my sister, my childhood companion, she had been part of this from the beginning. The same girl who used to sneak cookies with me under the staircase was now signing off on siphoning our father's legacy into the shadows. The betrayal cut deeper than I wanted to admit. When Daniel arrived later that morning, his expression was as grave as I'd ever seen it. I slid the documents across the table without a word. He scanned them quickly, his brows tightening. By the time he reached the transfer authorization, he let out a long exhale and leaned back in his chair. He tapped the signature with his pen. This is exactly what we needed. Proof of misappropriation and collusion. Esther, this could turn the tide completely. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, though it had long gone cold. So what do we do? He leaned forward. First, we don't rush. If we waive this in court right now, they'll scramble to cover their tracks. What we need is a pattern. Multiple transfers, multiple signatures. Enough to prove this wasn't an isolated decision, but a deliberate scheme. So we wait, I said flatly. We build, he corrected. We gather piece by piece, until the case is undeniable. I stared at the papers again. The the sharp lines of Mary's name burning into me. And in the meantime, you act normal. Visit the estate, ask questions, document everything. Don't let them suspect you know. If they think you're still just flailing, they'll get sloppy. Act normal. The words felt like poison, but I nodded because I understood. After Daniel left, I sat in silence for a long time. I thought about Mary's laughter, about the secrets we once shared, about the way she used to braid my hair before church. I thought about how she had looked at me in the courthouse, smirking as if she were already victorious. The sister I remembered was gone. Maybe she had been gone for a long time. And what stood before me now wasn't family. It was an opponent. That afternoon, I drove past the estate again, this time not stopping. I just needed to see it to remind myself of what was at stake. As I slowed near the gates, I noticed something that made my heart lurch. The same dark sedan, parked half a block down, angled toward the entrance. I didn't stop. I didn't stare. I just kept driving, hands tight on the wheel. But inside, every nerve screamed. They were watching me. And if Daniel was right, the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it was going to become. That night, as I filed the documents into a locked box under my bed, I whispered something aloud, though no one was there to hear it. Father, I won't let them erase you. Not your name. Not your legacy. The house might belong to Mother and Mary for now. But the shadows in their walls were mine to uncover. And I wasn't stopping until I pulled every single one into the light.